We're going to work through a program called Planning for Problems. It's a process that we have at TriGoEd. It's one of 5 or 6 processes we have. We have done a number of different webinars, starting pretty much when COVID took the school systems over and everybody went into remote learning way back in March, if you can remember that. And we've been working through our tools and techniques as we move through the year, and we're now using one of the last tools we have to talk about what's going to happen when you go back to the classroom and the kinds of problems you might encounter and how do you deal with those. So that's what this is going to be about. Quickly about TriGoEd. We're a educational and management consulting company. We do consulting work and training work. Been in business for 25 years. And we work primarily in the United States and Canada, 850 districts, thousands of people have been through our training programs. I'm actually the executive director of TriGoEd and the president. Rather new to that, about a year now. I'm actually home-based, like everybody else is these days. Our office in Princeton is closed down. I live outside of Hershey, Pennsylvania. The tools that we've been talking about over the last 2 quarters are shown here. We started off with a tool called SCAN, which is how do you deal with all the issues that you were encountering. We tied those in, that particular tool, into now you're in the remote teaching phase. What are the challenges you have with that? Out of that, we moved into early part of the summer with a tool called decision analysis. That one was built around making decisions. People were starting to look at their plans for reentry. They typically had a number of different people that they had to, a number of different ways they wanted to do reentry, come back to school. What was the best plan? We did a little work around problem analysis because as they started looking at their plans, there were various problems, so we talked about that. And today, I'm going to end up talking about the last process, which is called potential problem analysis. But before I get to that, I'd like to get a quick poll started. So this is the first moment where you're going to be interactive. Holly, can you launch the poll for me? All right. This is a pretty different response, to be honest with you, than we've been getting in the past. Most districts that most people who've been on our webinars before are saying they're not ready, or they don't feel like they're ready. So this is great that at least folks in the Alabama market say they are ready to rock and roll going back to school. So that's really good. It gives me a sense of what it's like out there. Like I said, we've done a couple of these, and we haven't focused on the other ones in various states. It's been more of a geographical nature across the United States. So kudos to you folks. All right. We put together a map when all this started to take place to sort of try to map out how we work with districts and how we consult with districts. And in the beginning, the map starts up here at the top where you can find the various, let me get my little marker. All the way through, this is where we did SCAN, situation appraisal. The red circles are where we're going to be talking about today, which is called potential problem analysis, where the acronym is PLAN. A plan or potential problem analysis, we feel, is used in 2 different ways. The first way is as you're building plans, or you're having initiatives, or you've got a project, or something's going on, you can use this process to take a look at it before you start your plan to say what could go wrong. And the idea is we'll lay out a couple steps to help you figure out what those potential problems are, how you can address those, and if they happen, how do you minimize them. The other time that you can use PLAN is once your project or plan or initiative is already underway. So as you're moving along, and the example, I'm going to do 2 teaching examples today. One is around building a science lab, and then the other one is actually reentry into school and possible problems around that. As you start your plan, like you're already going back to school, what could go wrong and how do you manage that? So it's effective in 2 general areas. Objectives give you an idea what could go wrong, how to keep the unclear from biting you and causing problems. Make sure you can understand all aspects and gaps in your potential plans or your current plans, and develop what we call preventive and contingent actions. It's pretty much the way you think about when you do potential problem analysis, but it's nicely laid out and it's got a great template that goes with it. It's got 4 basic steps that we call plan, as you can see there. One is actually what is the plan, then we're going to list potential problems, list potential likely causes. Then we're going to agree on preventive actions, and finally we're going to talk about contingent actions. It's built on a cause and effect wheel. And again, here are the big elements on it. The two major elements around this process are potential problems and the preventive and contingent actions. Probability, preventive actions, which we'll be talking about, they reduce the probability of a problem. They address likely causes. And the preventive actions are followed by contingent actions. So this is the idea that I tried to keep the problem from happening by dealing with the likely causes. It's happened anyway. How do I minimize the impact of that potential problem? So we talk about contingent actions, and they actually work on the effects and reduce those. It's built around some thinking that the founders of the company did 50 years ago. The founder of our company, Ben Trigo, was a social scientist at Princeton University, and he and his partner, a guy named Chuck Kempner, who formed the parent company, which is a global consulting company, spent time looking at people and studying how the best problem solvers thought, how the best leaders think. And this process around potential problem analysis, how you manage risk, is just built around continuing to study how good people manage risk and what they do to minimize the impact of those risks and those potential problems. Typical pitfall that this process tries to keep you from doing is firefighting. We try to get ahead of those fires. We try to get ahead of, like, when we're re-entering school, we're going back to school, and a COVID case comes in a particular district. What are you going to do? This process tries to keep you from jumping through hoops and fighting fires. First step is got 3 elements to it. The first thing we're going to do is develop an implementation statement. This concept is, what are we trying to do? Once we know what we're trying to do to keep the plan underway, what are the potential problems? That's a brainstorming step. And then the third piece in this first step is a threat assessment. We look at high, medium, and low, and probability and seriousness. So I'm going to walk you through 2 examples. The first example is building, like I said, a science lab. And I'll just teach real quick with that. And then we're going to pause and get some questions answered if you have any around it. And then we'll move into a real live example where I'm going to actually have you build some of this, work some of the steps with me. So the first piece, like I said, in the letter P is identifying the implementation statement. So in this case, it's building the idea of a science lab. Now, if you look on the left-hand side of the screen, you're going to see a small table. This table is actually a template that I will use, that I'll share with you when we're done with the webinar. I'll send it out to everybody that's on the webinar. And it's a nice little Word document you can use to follow the process along. But the first step in the letter P is get your implementation statement. So we're going to work this process through building a science lab. Second step is identifying potential problems. So what we do here is make sure we begin to list all the potential problems we can come up with around building a science lab. Now, because this is a teaching example, I only have 3 listed here. But if I was doing this in the real world with a group of science teachers, or actually I'm doing something like this with a district that's revamping their entire high school, we're doing, what are the potential problems? We're going to brainstorm every possible problem we can think of, and in this case, it's building a science lab, and write them down and document them. So the idea here is just get them listed out. When we do this with districts live at their sites, we use a lot of chart paper. When we do this with districts virtually, and you'll see me do it virtually in a little while, I'll just take the same template and keep it adding in what are the potential problems. So that's the second step in the letter P. The third step is, once we have our potential problems listed down, we begin to assess the threat. We begin to prioritize those. So what we'll end up with is, I will take, typically, after I get all these brainstormed out, I'll go back to the very top one and I'll say, okay, lack of space. What's the probability that we're going to have a lack of space in our new science lab? And the answers can be low, medium, or high. And so you'll have a discussion if you're doing this with a group of people. And in this particular case, with this team that we did this with, they came up with it's a low probability. We move over to the seriousness and we say, okay, now if it's low probability that we're going to have a lack of space, but we end up with a lack of space, how serious is that to us? And again, the assessment's around low to medium or high, and you're going to have discussion. People are going to give, their opinions around that, and you're going to end up with some letter assessment there. Go to the next one, cost overruns, same process. Go to the next one, same process, same discussion. So that's the letter P. We'll go to the second step, which is the letter L. Now we're going to list likely causes. And when we do that, there's a couple steps that we follow. What could cause this potential problem? And you always want to consider multiple causes, because a lot of times one potential problem can have more than one thing that will cause it. So when you get into this process, I always list my first potential problem that I'm going to walk through the rest of the process. I start with the one that has highs. It's high probability and a high seriousness. Now again, more than likely, I'm going to have a couple potential problems that have H's with them, HH. So I'm going to take each one of these potential problems that have high, and walk them through the rest of the process. So in this step, we're going to end up saying, okay, fire, what could cause our fire? And again, it's a brainstorming step. Mishandling of chemicals, improper storage of chemicals, faulty wiring. Multiple causes could cause fire. There are probably others that you can think of. I would list them all down here until I hit the void when people stop talking about it. That's the L step. Then we move to the A step. So now we're going to try to address those likely causes. We want to find a way to keep them from happening. And we want to identify who does what by when. So that would look like something like this. I'm still on one potential problem, fire, one of my higher probabilities of happening. I've identified likely causes, and now I'm looking at each likely cause, and I'm trying to identify a way to keep this cause, mishandling of chemicals, from happening. So there's two ways we came up, training and frequent refreshers. Once we get those preventive actions done, we go to the next one. What's a likely cause that here, improper storage of chemicals? How do we keep that from happening? How do we prevent it? A couple more things. Same thing in faulty wiring. Again, how do we prevent faulty wiring from happening? So what you end up with is a nice list of actions or activities, or even in some cases when you have a pretty big project, these could actually be small plans for keeping these things from happening so you don't have a fire. The last step that we do once we get these activities down, these preventive actions, is we identify who's going to do or set up that activity and by when. So in this particular case, the science teacher is going to post the science teacher is going to post the posters, and there's a monthly student refresher done by the science teacher. In this one, the facilities manager is conducting periodic spot checks, and in this one, inspections are conducted at key phases. Typically, it'll be done by facilities. So the preventive actions address the likely causes. They have a way of keeping these things from happening, and you assign people to do those. All right, now we'll move to the last step. Contingent actions. And the concept of contingent actions is, all right, we've done everything we can to keep that fire from happening. The fire has happened. Now what are we going to do? So there's a couple steps around that. We want to ask questions, what could reduce the seriousness if the fire happens in a particular case? Again, we're identifying who's doing what by when. And in this particular step in the process, we actually identify some triggers. So back to my example with the case that we're working on. We have contingent actions. So the fire has happened. We have sprinklers in place. They're installed during construction. The project manager makes sure they're installed. The trigger for the sprinkler is the sensor activation. Another contingent actions. The fire is happening. We've got evacuation routes set up. We're training staff, and the science teachers are the ones doing the training with the facilities team. What's going to trigger the evacuation? The fire alarm. Fire extinguishers in place. Again, another little project that might be done by somebody. In this particular case, it's facilities and the building manager. When do you pull out the fire extinguishers? When you observe a fire. do a little training around that. The last one is a contingent action is the fire resistant doors. They're installed during construction, overseen by the project manager. This one has no trigger. They're there, it's in place. So sometimes you will have contingent actions that don't necessarily have a trigger. That's fine. If you can find a trigger, that's better because you know when to pull the fire resistant doors, or in some cases, like in hotels, they're automatic. But you don't always need to have a trigger for every contingent action. And again, contingent actions act on the potential problems. So these contingent actions are happening because the fire has started. Our preventive actions are impacting the likely causes, which is trying to keep the fire from starting. So in a nutshell, that's the process. And that was used to build a science lab in this particular school. I mean, like I said before, I'm using it right now. I've got a district I'm working with that's revamping their entire high school. We're doing a lot of potential problem analysis, doing a lot of work as they started into the large project plan for developing the high school, or refurbishing the high school over the summer. And we're now taking a look at it, using it when they start, when school's coming back in. What are some of the things that are happening? All right, now we're going to move into and actually practice this one. Practice the potential problem analysis, the plan. First thing we're going to do is do the P letter again, and we're going to talk about what's our implementation statement. This one that I'm going to have you help me build is return to in-person instruction. So you are now going back to school. Some of you, maybe, I was talking to Holly, it sounds like a lot of districts in Alabama, if that's where you are already underway. Up here in Pennsylvania, most of the schools are starting latter part of August. So if you're either underway or you're thinking about returning, this process is what we're going to talk about. We're going to go through brainstorming the potential problems for returning to classroom instruction. You're going to walk me through what you guys think is the high, medium, and low probability and seriousness. And I'm actually going to share the document that we have to do this with. So this is the Word document I'll be sending you, as well as the PowerPoint slides. This is the document that we actually use when we do these, use this particular process live. You can see my implementation statement is a return to in-classroom instruction. First step after I've got everybody on board with that is listing the potential problems. So now, you are going back to school now, you're already back to school, or you're starting back to school. What are some potential problems you're encountering right now around going back to the classroom? Anybody want to throw one out for me?
We talked about in our problem solving team, lunch is going to be an issue because kids won't be able to wear their masks while they eat, and it'll be hard to keep them distant, socially distant from each other.
Okay, lunch. Now, do you mean socially distanced during lunch or socially distanced just in general?
Specifically during lunch, but in general, because I'm in middle school.
Ah, yes. Okay, and I'll put social distance in general here as another one. What's another one that people have? What are potential problems with going back to school?
I think one of the issues is the students that are going back to school, but they're virtual, trying to keep up with what's actually going on in the classroom for those that are physically on campus.
Virtual
versus
ability to with students in the classroom. That capture it?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your question.
I'm saying, did I capture it for you?
Yes, yes. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. What's another one?
Well, there's always the potential concern for, positive COVID cases in the school. Like, what do we do then if, one of our students tests positive or faculty members?
Recognize that in the beauty of doing this live, spelling does not count. Actually, it'll let me fix it now because it's a Word document. All right, did I get what you said?
Yes, sir. Perfect.
Cool, and I spelled it right this time. Okay, what's another one?
Michael, I'm hearing a lot of schools talk about students entering with symptoms, and of course, ADPH has requested or recommended that they have some type of room where students could be isolated with symptoms, but just the concern with students entering with symptoms.
Okay, did I get it for you? Nice thumbs up. You've been doing this a lot, Holly. You know how to use Zoom. All right, anybody have another one? I'll tell you one I hear all the time is, and it's not only in the webinars, it's actually doing this live with school districts, is enough PPE for both students and faculty. So I'm going to put that one in there. So in the real world, which is what we're doing right now, I would continue brainstorming with everybody until I ran out of potential problems, which is kind of where we're at now. We've gone quiet. So it seems like we've got the key ones up here, which is great. What I didn't teach before, but I always do before I go to the next step, is I go back and I look to see if I have combined potential problems. So like up here, I started to do that because I asked whoever gave me the lunch, eating and social distancing, and said, well, you know, I get social distancing in lunch, but isn't social distancing another potential problem elsewhere? So I try to break some of these out into, you know, you may have multiple potential problems in one line. So I'll try to break them out. So if I was going to go back to give you an example, this one that I think Holly gave me, students entering with symptoms and room to isolate them. When I see the word "and" in one of these, that's a trigger for me to say there's probably two potential problems here. The first potential problem is, how do we, you know, students entering with symptoms, how do we manage that potential problem? And then the other one to me would be the room for COVID isolation of students with potential problems. The reason you want to break those out, because as you move through the rest of this process, what might be the cause of a student entering with the school with symptoms is not the same cause of a potential problem with the isolation in the room. So I typically go back and make sure I don't have these things blended together. If I've got multiple ones, I just separate them out. But I'm not going to take the time to do that right now. Just giving you a tip on this. Once I do that, the next step in the process, which is the assessment of the threat, is I go back to the top one and I ask typically whoever gave that to me and say, okay, probability, your answer is high, medium, or low. And whoever gave that to me, what do you think the probability is that at lunchtime there's going to be challenges with eating because of the mask and social distancing? Is it high, medium, or low?
Because I'm in a middle school, I would say it's high.
Okay. What's the rest of the group feel about that? Comfortable with high?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's a high
Yes.
possibility.
Okay. All right. So again, if the team agrees it's high, we'll go over to the seriousness side of it. How serious, is this if they can't eat for social distance? High, medium, or low?
I'm gonna say medium, because they're probably, if they're not symptomatic, if they've made it to that point in the day and they're not symptomatic, they're probably not spreading anything. And if they're wearing masks, then it would be medium. But I would put condition on the medium. Otherwise, I would place it at high.
Okay. What's the rest of the group feel about that? Comfortable with medium?
Yes.
All right, I'll take silence as agreement on that. Then I go down to the next one, social distancing in general. What's the probability that that's going to be a potential problem? High, medium, or low?
High.
Aye.
Every district I work with and every teacher I talk to and every administrator is really concerned about it. Holly and I were talking about that at the University of Alabama. Just the ability to social distance. So I think it is a high. What's the seriousness if they don't social distance?
I would say in general, in the general setting, it's high.
Okay.
Lunch is a little more controlled, but in general, I would say it's high.
All right. Everybody comfortable with 2 H's there?
Yes.
All right. We'll go to the next one. Virtual and ability to keep up with students in the classroom. So this was the idea that people who are working virtually, because of the way the virtual instruction is being viewed or being taught, those students are not able to stay at the same pace that the students are actually having the same kind of instruction in the classroom. What's the probability of that happening?
I would say probably medium.
Okay. Anybody disagree with that? All right. Then I'd move over to the seriousness. If it does happen, that potential problem. So the students working virtually are now being recognized as not keeping up the same pace of the students are getting the instruction in the classroom. How serious is that? High, medium, or low?
Now it's high if it actually does happen.
All right. So I'm going to stop here because I just showed you how to do that step in the process. I would go through each one of these that we have listed here and have that same kind of conversation with people. Typically, the way I do it is I go back to this one and I say, okay, who gave me positive COVID cases in the school? Whoever it is would ask, start talking, and I'd say, okay, what's the probability of that happening? Just like I was doing with you. They'd give me an HM or L answer, and then I'd ask the team, okay, does everybody agree with that? Sometimes you're going to get discussions. Sometimes everybody agrees to it. The ones that are challenging is where one person says it's a high probability and somebody else says, no, it's a low probability. The way I facilitate that is just let them talk about why, and then let the rest of the team get involved. And typically, it doesn't become a major argument. It just becomes an understanding of why people feel the way they do, and you can usually get to some middle ground. So if it's an H and an L, you might end up with an M, or some of the people might move from the low up to the H side of it. That's the first step in P. It's this, the implementation, which is going back to school, brainstorming potential problems, then doing the threat assessment using high, medium, or low. So I'm just going to take and teach again using the same example we started with. Again, I just pulled some of the more common ones that we've seen as I've done these with clients, or we've done them in webinars. But again, this is the same process. Here's our implementation statement, returning to the back to school. Here is the potential problems that I'm teaching through. Once we have those down, here's the threat assessment around it. And in this particular case, with my example, I came up COVID in the classroom is high, high. What I normally do, like I told you before when I taught the science lab thing, is I go to the potential problems that have the 2 H's, high probability and high seriousness, and those are the first ones I walk through the process. So the rest of this example, I'm going to walk through COVID in the classroom. So the next step then is to identify likely causes for COVID in the classroom. Again, it's a brainstorming exercise. What could cause COVID in the classroom? Teachers getting sick, students getting sick, protocols not followed. And as I mentioned before, I would write down everything that everybody had to say here. I wouldn't stop. I wouldn't make it one slide, or I'd stop at 3. Typically, when you have a potential problem, you have multiple causes. It's rare that it's a one-to-one relationship. So that's the L step. Once I get the L step done, I am now going to find a way to stop these causes from happening, which is the A step around preventive actions. So for teachers getting sick, limit interactions, staff meetings in small group, enforce mask wearing, staff and students. Students getting sick, fairly similar. Implement all reopening procedures to de-densify student population, protocols not followed, ensure adequate PPE, training and district guidelines, teachers, students, and staff. Now, these preventive actions are designed to stop these likely causes from happening. if we do a good job of that, this potential problem shouldn't happen to us. And lots of times people want to stop here, but this process makes you do one more step, because sometimes no matter how hard you try, this potential problem happens anyway. So you end up with this contingency action step. Again, I'm working on COVID in the classroom. It's happened. What do I do to minimize the impact? Implement quarantine and additional cleaning procedures. Notify families of possible exposure. Notify Department of Health to start contact tracing. The trigger for that is I've got a case confirmed, either a teacher or a student, or I'll give you a perfect example. I was talking to Holly about this earlier. One district I'm working with, they haven't gone back to school yet, but they put together this whole plan. And what happened was they had a custodian that on Friday felt sick during the week, but like a lot of people, came to work anyway. On Friday, had gone to an urgent care clinic, got the notification that she had tested positive for COVID. So this potential contingency action at that district was to notify the Department of Health to start contact tracing. Well, it turns out in this particular state, this woman, the custodian, notified her supervisor, who then notified the superintendent, who then reached out to the Department of Health. And the Department of Health said they can't start contact tracing until they get an actual written notice from the doctor or the urgent care center. So by the time they figured that out, the urgent care center had already closed for Friday, and it didn't open up again until Monday. So there was a problem even in their contingency actions. So even if you do this process, you still may have issues. And their issue was they went back to the process and began to redo their contingency actions. So let me stop for a second and point out one other thing. Two things are missing in the preventive actions and the contingent actions are not really well defined. If you remember the teaching slides, we want to know who does what by when. In this particular case, this one shows some people, which are staff or students, doing this. My experience in using this process is you need to be more explicit. So it might be for teachers getting sick, it could be the union rep. And it's Michael Curran-Hayes. His name is here, union rep. And he's going to put together a plan that helps keep the teachers from getting sick, these kinds of things. And I'm going to have that done by next week. Same thing here. I prefer people's names and actual dates. These are too vague for me, but sometimes that's as much as you can get. Over here, there's really nobody assigned to do this. And what happens if you have no one assigned to it, typically it doesn't get done. So last point I want to make is get people's names and dates and times when they're going to get things assigned and get things done. All right, that's it. Real quick, it's a simple process, but it's really robust and very powerful. Do you have any questions around it? Any comments or any thoughts?
Well, I'm in Mobile County, and we are all virtual starting next Tuesday. But I'm part of a problem-solving team to decide what we're going to do when we do go back to school. So I really like this because we've been kind of talking and throwing out ideas, but this is a way for us to really home in and focus on which problems and their likelihood to do and identify the setup.
Yeah,
the structure.
It's a structure, it's a framework.
Yeah.
People think. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that was it. I like the framework. It's really very, very simply elegant.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. That was the founder 50 years ago, and Ben will be, he's passed away, but I'm sure he's smiling right now with that because and my background is I was in education when I first started my career. Long story made short, I worked for the parent company for 22 years as a senior partner. And this process is used in the private industry, and we use it all over the world. And it's the beauty of it is it's a framework that people can follow. And this is, if you lay it out for them, this is kind of how they think. And what it does in meetings, if you use this framework, as the meetings actually accomplish things. You get to things quicker and more efficiently. You're going to get there in your problem team meetings. You know, you're going to get ideas down and you're going to work your way through. This just makes it more efficient. Other comments?
Not to piggyback, but I am piggybacking.
Go
I
for it.
think the simplicity of it all and just being able to identify, oftentimes we talk about doing things and who's going to do it, but we don't necessarily document it. And it's simple enough that it's not a dissertation per se. And so I think I like the simplistic nature of it and how it's set up. So the structure in and of itself.
Yeah, and again, that's another good point. That's why I stressed, even in my example, I left it kind of vague, who does what by when. I have to make people's names there and dates and times, because now they're held accountable to get those activities done. And most people, you know, if their name is on something, they're going to do it. But it's not a giant action plan. It's pretty simple. Like, okay, we got to set up a training program for teachers around, you know, how to hand wash or something like that. Well, Michael is the head of the department, is going to do that, and we're going to have that training starting next week, September, you know, whatever it is. Agreed. Any other comments?
Michael, I think we talked about this earlier in one of the sessions you offered this summer, but of course our state has strategic plans that they ask districts to complete. And so this aligns really well with it, but yet, especially in this situation with COVID, it can be customized for their particular needs. And, I already am thinking we have a lot of parent groups as well in the region. And this would allow parents as well, if they've identified a potential problem, maybe in a leadership group, to show that you're valuing their voice and documenting that as well.
You're right, Holly. A couple of points you made there that I want to add on to. One is this process is great for anything that you think could go wrong. I'm using a COVID example because it's near and dear to everybody right now. But, you know, we use it in strategic planning with districts ourselves. You know, this is just a nice process you can use when you're trying to roll out anything. The other thing about it is a very inclusive process. So if you have a community team that has parents on it, school board members on it, other teachers, whatever that team is made up of, again, it's a framework that people, if you spend a few minutes just showing them the steps, like I'll take that document, the Word document I'm going to share with you, and I'll just put it up on a screen and just say, here's the first step we're going to do, here's the second step, this is the third, and this is the fourth. Everybody gets it. And then because they're involved, parents are putting out what they think are the potential problems. And it's really amazing. I was doing this again. I mean, my whole team is doing this, using this process right now a lot with districts we're working with. But the thing when you're facilitating, and, you know, I'm doing this virtually with groups and I have parents in there, they think of things that, you know, we as educators don't think of. And they're usually good. And just because they thought about it and then you walk through the process, they're now bought into everything. It feels like they're a part of it. So it's got that kind of ability too. All right, anything else from anybody? Any other comments, observations? All right. I will send everybody that's on here the PowerPoint presentation. It'll be a PDF. Hopefully that'll give you enough guidance that if you want to try this on your own, you can kind of look back on that and say, oh yeah, that 6th slide says do this, so I'm going to go. We are offering to all people that we work with free coaching right now. We feel strongly about all of our processes. We've done this since we started with Holly and since we started this back in April. If you and one of you is talking about going back to your team and using this, if you want some free coaching, I'm happy to do that. Pro bono consulting, same thing. You know, right now we're offering the tools and the techniques to try to help districts get to a point where they can get going. In this particular program, potential problem analysis, we now have virtual training. Our training is both virtual and in-house, but just about everybody can't do in-house training. So we're running 2-hour training sessions where we spend 2 hours teaching you how to do this process and practicing it in Zoom. We're offering discounts on that until December. I also will send you the Word document where I kind of walk through how that works and how the process works on it. It's a nice framework to follow. You can share that with people. Holly, anything else you want to add to the end of this?
Just a reminder to sign in. The link is in the chat box. But I just wanted to say, I see some new faces today who may not have been with us this summer. I think, Michael, you offered 3 sessions this summer, something like that. And yeah. They have been working with one of our districts, and the superintendent recommended the great work that they were doing. And they're doing all this for free, no charge, just like you mentioned, the coaching right now. They just want to be of service to educators. So thank you so much for doing that.
You're welcome, Holly. And again, all you got to do is reach out to me. My contact information will be in the deck I send to you. And if you don't want to reach out to me, go look at our website, because some of the other tools that we've taught over the past few months are also done as webinars and have been video recorded. They're on our website, so you should be able to find that information there.